Northern Chile is defined by absence. The Atacama Desert stretches from the Pacific coast toward the Andes, a plateau of rock and dust shaped by wind and time. Rain is rare enough to be remembered by year. Vegetation thins, then disappears. Sound carries far in the dry air and then fades. The land offers little indication of what lies beneath it. Along the desert's interior, small industrial sites interrupt the terrain. They are marked by gravel roads, rusted equipment, and temporary structures built to endure heat rather than weather. From a distance, these sites appear quiet, even inactive. There are no towns nearby, no natural shelter, and few visual cues that people are present at all. The San José mines sat within this environment, several hours from the nearest city of Copiapó. It was an older operation, carved into hard rock, with tunnels that descended steeply into the earth. From the surface, the mine entrance looked ordinary, an opening reinforced with steel, surrounded by machinery and spoil piles. Nothing about it suggested urgency. Above ground, the desert remained unchanged day after day. The sun rose and fell with regularity. Winds moved across the plain. The mine functioned as it had for years, drawing workers underground at the start of each shift and releasing them again at the end. On the morning of August 5, 2010, there was no visible sign that this routine would be interrupted. Mining in northern Chile has long been shaped by necessity. The region's mineral deposits, copper, gold, and other metals, have sustained local economies for generations. For many workers, employment in mines like San José was not a temporary assignment but a continuation of family tradition and regional identity. The work was physically demanding, but it was familiar. The San José mine began operations in the late 19th century. By 2010, it was considered small by industrial standards and technologically modest. It relied on conventional drilling and blasting methods rather than large-scale automation. Its tunnels extended more than 700 meters below the surface, branching into a complex network shaped by decades of incremental excavation. Maintenance was ongoing but uneven, and sections of the mine showed signs of structural stress typical of aging operations. The men who worked there came from different parts of Chile, though many lived in the Atacama region. Their backgrounds varied. Some had decades of mining experience. Others were relatively new, having moved into the industry for stable income. Most were accustomed to long shifts underground and the conditions that accompanied them: heat, dust, limited light, and the constant mechanical noise of drilling and hauling. A standard shift involved descending via access ramps in diesel-powered vehicles, then walking or driving deeper into assigned work areas. Safety procedures existed, but enforcement depended heavily on supervisors and conditions at the time. The mine had experienced previous accidents, including fatalities, which were known among the workforce. These incidents contributed to an awareness of risk, but they did not halt operations. At the start of August 2010, 33 men were scheduled to work an afternoon shift. Their tasks included drilling, blasting preparation, and transport of extracted material. As with other days, they gathered at the surface, checked equipment, and descended together. Communication with the surface relied on radio systems that were functional but limited in reach. The mine included an emergency shelter known as the refuge. It was designed to hold a small number of workers for short periods, stocked with basic supplies in case of temporary isolation. The refuge was not intended for long-term habitation. Its presence was considered a precaution rather than a central feature of daily operations. For the men underground that day, the work was routine. The environment was familiar. The risks were understood in general terms, but no immediate threat was apparent. The mine had operated under similar conditions many times before. There was no announcement, warning, or indication that the day would differ from others. As the shift progressed, the miners moved deeper into the network of tunnels, focused on their assigned tasks. Above them, the desert remained still, offering no signal of the events about to unfold below the surface. Shortly after the afternoon shift began on August 5, 2010, a structural failure occurred deep within the San José mine. A section of rock gave way near one of the main access tunnels, triggering a collapse that sent debris through the passageways. Dust filled the air. The sound was immediate and forceful, then quickly muffled by distance and depth. The collapse blocked the primary route to the surface. Large rock fragments and loose material settled into place, creating an obstruction that could not be cleared with the tools available underground. The tunnel that normally connected the work areas to the exit was no longer passable. The 33 men working below were not injured by the initial event. They regrouped and assessed their situation using the information they had. Communication systems failed shortly after the collapse. Radio contact with the surface could not be re-established. Attempts to reach alternate exits revealed that secondary routes were also compromised or inaccessible. With limited options, the group moved toward the refuge. It was one of the few locations underground designed to provide shelter in an emergency. The miners reached it together, bringing with them what equipment and supplies they could carry. Once inside, they took inventory of the space and its contents. The refuge measured only a few meters across. It contained stored water, canned food, and limited medical supplies. The provisions were calculated for a small group to survive for a short duration, under the assumption that rescue or evacuation would occur quickly. There was no reliable way to signal their location. As time passed, the immediate dust settled, but conditions remained unchanged. The tunnel blockage did not shift. The air was warm and heavy. Without contact from the surface, the miners could not know whether the collapse had been detected or whether assistance was being organized. The realization emerged gradually. The collapse was not a temporary obstruction. The mine's depth and isolation meant that self-rescue was unlikely. What had begun as a routine workday had become a situation defined by confinement, uncertainty, and dependence on limited resources. The point of return had passed. The refuge became the center of daily existence. It was a reinforced chamber carved into rock, designed to withstand pressure and provide temporary protection. Inside, the temperature remained high, often exceeding 30 degrees Celsius. Ventilation was minimal. Light came from headlamps and a small number of fixed lamps powered by batteries. The miners began by organizing themselves. Roles were assigned based on experience and ability. One of the men, Luis Urzua, the shift supervisor, assumed responsibility for coordination. His task was not symbolic. Decisions about rationing, movement, and discipline would affect survival. The group accepted this structure without formal discussion. Food supplies were counted. The refuge contained canned tuna, crackers, milk, and water. The quantities were not sufficient for 33 people over an extended period. Based on estimates, the men calculated that normal consumption would exhaust supplies within days. Rationing began immediately. Each miner received a small portion of food every 48 hours. Water was measured carefully. Portions were reduced to the minimum necessary to maintain basic function. Hunger became a constant condition rather than an emergency. The men adjusted their expectations and routines around it. Time underground did not pass in a familiar way. There was no natural light. Days were marked by shifts in activity rather than by sunrise or sunset. The group established a schedule to impose order. Cleaning, inspections, and brief periods of rest were assigned to specific intervals. Physical activity was limited to conserve energy. Air quality was a concern. The mine's ventilation system was compromised, but some airflow continued through shafts and cracks. The men monitored their breathing and the condition of lamps for signs of oxygen depletion. Carbon dioxide levels were unknown. Decisions were made cautiously, with movement restricted to essential tasks. Heat affected sleep. The rocks surrounding the refuge retained warmth, and humidity increased as bodies occupied the space. Rest was intermittent. Some miners slept in short periods, others remained awake for long stretches. Fatigue accumulated unevenly. Communication attempts continued. The men tried to reach the surface through available channels, including tapping on pipes and attempting to access blocked shafts. These efforts were limited by distance and obstruction. No response was received. Above ground, rescue operations began, but the miners could not know this. Underground, the absence of information was complete. The possibility that the collapse had gone unnoticed could not be dismissed. Previous accidents at the mine had not always resulted in immediate or successful rescue. As days passed, the group focused on maintenance of morale without dramatization. Conversations were practical. Personal stories were shared sparingly. Religious practices varied among the men, but some found structure in prayer or quiet reflection. Others concentrated on mechanical tasks to occupy time. Food supplies diminished. When the stored rations were nearly exhausted, the men searched the mine for alternatives. They located emergency stores left in vehicles deeper in the tunnels, small amounts of food intended for individual use. These were collected and redistributed. Nothing was wasted. Water remained the most critical resource. Condensation was gathered from surfaces. Drips from rock were collected where possible. Consumption remained strictly controlled. Physical exertion was minimized to reduce dehydration. Health issues emerged gradually. Minor injuries that would normally receive immediate treatment became concerns due to limited supplies. Skin infections, foot problems, and digestive discomfort were common. The heat and lack of hygiene increased risk, but the group maintained cleaning routines using available materials. Psychological strain increased with time. Isolation was not sudden, it accumulated. The lack of external reference points made it difficult to measure duration. Some men kept mental counts of days based on routine cycles. Others avoided thinking in terms of time at all. Leadership remained consistent. Decisions were communicated clearly and without emphasis. There was no expectation of comfort, only of continuation. Conflicts occurred but were contained. The shared condition limited escalation. Survival depended on cooperation. On the 17th day underground, a sound broke the pattern. A drilling noise, faint but distinct, traveled through the rock. The men paused their activities to listen. The sound was intermittent, distant, and uncertain. It could not be confirmed as intentional. Still, it introduced a new variable. When the drill bit finally broke through near the refuge, the moment was not immediate relief. It was confirmation of contact. A note was attached to the drill head, written by the miners, stating their number and condition. The message reached the surface, marking the first verified communication since the collapse. With contact established, procedures changed. Supplies could eventually be delivered through the borehole. Instructions were exchanged. The miners were informed of their location and the status of rescue planning. The knowledge did not alter conditions immediately, but it altered expectations. Food deliveries began in stages. Small containers were lowered, carrying nutrients designed to stabilize health rather than provide comfort. Water and medical supplies followed. Consumption increased cautiously to avoid shock to weakened bodies. A new routine formed around deliveries. The borehole became a focal point. Communication devices allowed limited conversation with the surface. Families were informed of survival. The miners learned that they were not alone in uncertainty. Despite contact, confinement continued. Rescue would require months of drilling. The men adjusted again, this time to a known duration. The discipline established earlier remained necessary. Overconsumption or loss of focus could still be fatal. Exercise routines were introduced under guidance to maintain muscle tone. Medical monitoring identified individuals at higher risk. Mental health support was provided through communication, but privacy was limited. The refuge remained crowded. As weeks passed, the mine became a closed system. Life was reduced to essential actions. The men adapted to scarcity, heat, and routine. The desert above remained distant and unchanged, while below, survival was managed through structure rather than hope. As the weeks extended beyond a month, the effects of confinement became more pronounced. The human body, adapted to variation and movement, responded unevenly to the conditions underground. Weight loss was common. Muscle mass declined despite controlled exercise. Sleep patterns remained fragmented, influenced by heat, noise, and the absence of natural cues. Medical monitoring identified rising concerns. Some miners developed infections that required careful management with limited antibiotics. Others experienced worsening chronic conditions, including vision problems and respiratory irritation. The high temperature and humidity placed continuous strain on the cardiovascular system. Hydration improved with increased supply, but recovery was gradual. Psychological pressure intensified in subtle ways. The knowledge of a planned rescue did not eliminate uncertainty. Drilling progress was slow and technical challenges were frequent. Timelines were adjusted and communicated cautiously. Delays were explained, but the implications were understood without elaboration. Time perception shifted further. Days were marked by deliveries, medical checks, and scheduled communication. Outside events became abstract. News from the surface arrived filtered and controlled, intended to stabilize rather than inform fully. The men remained aware of global attention, but it did not alter their physical reality. Conflicts increased briefly as fatigue accumulated. Small disagreements over space, noise, and routine occurred. These were addressed through mediation rather than authority. The group had learned that unresolved tension posed a greater risk than discomfort. Several miners showed signs of acute stress. Episodes of withdrawal, agitation, or disorientation were noted. Mental health professionals on the surface provided guidance through communication channels. Privacy was limited, but support was continuous. No one was removed from the group or isolated. The heat remained constant. Ventilation improvements reduced some discomfort, but the refuge could not be cooled. Clothing was minimal. Hygiene routines continued with discipline, despite limited water. The maintenance of order served both practical and psychological functions. As the rescue shaft neared completion, preparations intensified. The miners were briefed on extraction procedures. Physical conditioning became more structured. Diets were adjusted to prepare bodies for movement and changes in pressure. Medical evaluations determined extraction order based on health criteria. The possibility of failure was not emphasized, but it remained implicit. Equipment testing underground was limited. The rescue plan relied on precision and coordination across distance and depth. The miners prepared without ceremony. By the end of the 9th week, the body strain was evident but managed. No deaths had occurred. Survival had been sustained through routine, restraint, and adaptation. The remaining challenge was transition, moving from confinement to extraction without introducing new risk. The final phase began without announcement. Drilling had reached the required depth, and the rescue shaft was stabilized. A narrow capsule, designed to carry one person at a time, was lowered into the mine. Its arrival did not mark an end, but a change in procedure. Extraction followed a fixed order determined by medical assessment and operational need. The process was slow. Each ascent required careful coordination, monitoring heart rate, oxygen levels, and pressure changes. The capsule moved through the shaft with deliberate speed. For the miners, departure from the refuge was measured and controlled. Each man prepared his equipment, received final instructions, and entered the capsule alone. The transition from confined darkness to movement was abrupt but brief. Communication with the surface remained continuous. Above ground, conditions were controlled to limit sensory overload. Medical staff received each miner immediately. The process continued without interruption for more than 22 hours. Underground, the remaining men maintained routine as numbers decreased. The refuge gradually emptied. The final miner emerged on October 13, 2010. The extraction marked the end of physical confinement. There was no immediate return to normalcy. Each individual entered medical care and observation. The mine itself was sealed. The desert above remained unchanged. The event concluded without spectacle underground, defined by completion rather than release. The San José mine did not reopen. Investigations documented structural instability and regulatory failures. The site became a reference point rather than a workplace. The rescue was studied in technical, medical, and organizational terms. For the 33 men, survival did not erase the experience. Long-term effects varied. Some returned to mining. Others did not. The period underground remained a fixed interval in their lives, defined by routine and limitation rather than drama. The event demonstrated the capacity for coordinated survival under extreme constraint. It also exposed the consequences of risk accepted as normal. No single decision defined the outcome. Continuation, restraint, and cooperation did. The Atacama Desert continues to appear empty from a distance. Beneath it, the mine remains closed, its tunnels unchanged. The story persists without noise, as a record of endurance shaped by environment, structure, and time.